Ladies and gentlemen, you ever feel like you were about to make a decision? Maybe it was a voice. Maybe it was a nudge. Maybe it was just that unshakable discomfort. But you did it anyway. A lady, you found yourself asking, why didn't I live? Today's message is titled, The Power of the Warning. There's a reason God gives us warnings. And it's not because He wants to hold us back. It's because He sees further down the road than we can. He sees the collisions before we make the turn. He sees the collapse before we see the cracks. When God says, don't go there, it's not about restriction. It's about protection. It's about preservation. It's about the longevity of your purpose. Simon Sinek often talks about the why behind decisions. Why do we lead? Why do we act? Why do we choose what we choose? But rarely do we pause and ask, why is God telling me no? We take no as rejection. We interpret it as punishment. But what if it's neither? What if it's actually God's way of saving us from stepping into something that looks right, but is actually wrong for who we are? Sometimes the greatest form of love is a boundary, and sometimes that boundary shows up as a warning. You know that feeling in your gut when something doesn't sit right, even though it all looks good on paper? That's not fear, that's not insecurity, that's discernment. That's divine intelligence. That's God's early alert system, your spiritual smoke alarm. And here's the truth. God doesn't shout when He doesn't have to. He whispers first. He nudges. He places a check in your spirit. And if we train ourselves to listen in the quiet, we won't have to learn the hard way in the chaos. People often say, I just want God to speak to me. But what they really mean is, I want God to agree with me. Let me be clear. Opportunity is not always divine. Just because a door is open doesn't mean God opened it. Some doors are traps with golden handles. Some opportunities are tests dressed in success. And if you don't know your why, you'll chase anything that sparkles. You'll say yes to things that have nothing to do with your purpose, and then you'll wonder why your spirit is exhausted. God says don't go there, not because you aren't good enough, but because what's there isn't good for you. You are called, chosen, and marked. And when you're marked, you can't move like everyone else. You can't follow trends. You can't follow crowds. You've got to follow God. even when it doesn't make sense. The warning doesn't always come with thunder. Sometimes it shows up as confusion. Sometimes it looks like delay. Sometimes the door just won't open, no matter how hard you push. That's not failure. That's a favor. That's God protecting what He's preparing. That's God blocking what looks like a blessing but is really a burden. When you trust that God's "don't go there" is not an interruption but an intervention, you stop begging for things He's already blocked. What separates wise leaders from reckless ones is not their level of intelligence. It's their ability to read the signs. It's their willingness to listen to what others ignore. In Simon Sinek's words, people don't follow what you do, they follow why you do it. And God doesn't just want to lead your hands, He wants to lead your why. He wants your motivation to match your mission. He wants your direction to match your destiny. And to do that, sometimes He has to step in and say, "Stop, that's not the way, don't go there." The warning is not the problem, ignoring it is. God is not just the author of opportunity, He's the protector of purpose. And if He says don't go, it means He has something better in mind. Always. The story of ignoring the warning. We don't learn the value of a warning until we ignore one. That's when the lesson becomes real. That's when the pain shows up. That's when we sit in silence and say, "I knew it, I should have listened." There's something about the aftermath of ignoring a nudge that makes you more sensitive the next time God whispers, "Don't go there." We don't learn the value of a warning until we ignore one. That's when the lesson becomes real. That's when the pain shows up. That's when we sit in silence and say, "I knew it. I should have listened." There's something about the aftermath of ignoring a nudge that makes you more sensitive the next time God whispers, "Don't go there." Let me share a story. It's a true one. A friend of mine, let's call him David, was offered what looked like the opportunity of a lifetime. A job in another city. Bigger salary, more influence, a title that carried weight. On paper, it was perfect. Everyone around him said, "This is it. This is your moment." And it felt good. It stroked the ego. It made sense logically. But deep down, something was unsettled. David couldn't sleep. He kept feeling this weight, this tension. Not fear, just discomfort. But he brushed it off. He told himself, "This is just nerves. This is just me being afraid of change." But that wasn't the truth. The truth was, God was warning him. Gently, quietly, repeatedly. But David ignored it. He told himself what we all tell ourselves when the warning gets in the way of what we want. Maybe I'm just overthinking. Maybe I'm just being overly cautious. And he went anyway. He moved cities. He took the job. He stepped into the role. At first, everything seemed fine. But within months, the reality set in. The environment was toxic. The leadership was unethical. The pressure was inhumane. His values were constantly compromised. His health started to decline. His joy was gone. And one day, sitting alone in his apartment, he whispered to himself, "God tried to tell me. He warned me." That one sentence changed everything. Because now he could see it. All the signs, all the red flags, all the internal alerts he ignored. He didn't need another confirmation. He had already received it. He just didn't want it. That's the danger of ignoring the warning. It's not just that you go somewhere you shouldn't have, it's that you knew deep down you weren't supposed to go, and you did it anyway. And that awareness haunts you more than the consequences ever could. You live in a culture that celebrates the grind, the hustle, the risk. We're taught to chase every open door, say yes to every opportunity, and trust our own ambition. But here's the truth. Not everything that glitters is gold. and not every opportunity is an assignment. You can walk through a door that looks divine and discover it's actually a distraction. That's what happened to David. That's what happens to so many of us when we prioritize momentum over meaning. Or what if the warning isn't meant to frustrate you, but to free you? What if the very thing you're disappointed by today, because God said no, is the thing you'll be thanking Him for a year from now? Warnings don't feel like blessings until we look back and realize they were the reason we avoided disaster. Simon Sinek teaches that real leadership is about clarity. It's about knowing who you are and what you stand for, so that when the world offers you a shiny distraction, you don't sell your soul just to say yes. But clarity only comes when we are honest with ourselves. And honesty starts when we admit, I felt the warning. I just didn't want to obey it. God's not trying to ruin your life with a warning. He's trying to rescue it. He's not trying to take opportunities from you. He's trying to make sure the ones you step into don't take you away from your purpose. David learned that the hard way, but he also learned something else. God doesn't abandon you just because you ignored the warning. He meets you in the consequence, restores what was broken, and teaches you how to listen better next time. Learning to recognize God's don't, not emotional sensitivity, but spiritual sensitivity. You have to slow down enough to pay attention. You have to learn the difference between anxiety and discernment, between fear and wisdom. Because sometimes the no you're hearing isn't about failure, it's about foresight. But God's don't often comes as friction. You try to force something to work, and no matter what you do, it just won't fit. The meetings fall through, the conversations feel forced, the vibe is off. You keep telling yourself, I just need to push harder. But God is whispering, you're pushing in the wrong direction. It's not always about pushing through resistance. Sometimes it's about learning when resistance is a signal to pause. There's a difference between spiritual resistance and spiritual warfare. Not everything hard is the enemy trying to block you. Sometimes it's God trying to redirect you. But if you don't recognize His voice, you'll misinterpret His protection as punishment. And you get mad at God for the very thing that's saving your life. Simon Sinek teaches that clarity comes from listening deeply, not just to others, but to yourself. In the same way, hearing God's warning starts with learning how He speaks to you. For some, it's a gut feeling. For others, it's a deep unease. Some people hear His voice in their dreams. Others feel it in their relationships. When certain people start fading, certain doors start closing, and certain comforts are removed. Those aren't coincidences. That's communication. That's how God says, don't go there. We often expect clarity before obedience. But God usually gives us the instruction before He gives us the explanation. You'll say no before He shows you why. That's why discernment is so crucial. It gives you the confidence to obey without needing all the details. If you only obey when it makes sense, you're not following God. God's don't also shows up in timing. Just because something is good doesn't mean it's now. Delay is not denial, it's divine alignment. Sometimes He withholds because you're not ready, or because it's not ready, or because it would be a blessing in the wrong season, which makes it a burden. So when you hear that still small voice say, not yet, don't call it rejection, call it protection, because that's exactly what it is. Recognizing the don't means you trust God's vantage point more than your own desires. It means you trust that He can see what you cannot. And if He says, don't go there, it's because something there would compromise what He's building in you. This is about more than avoiding bad decisions. It's about protecting your assignment. It's about staying aligned with your identity, your purpose, your calling. Simon Sinek says people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. And the same is true in your walk with God. You don't follow Him just because of what He gives. You follow Him because you trust why He leads the way He does. And when He says don't, that why becomes your anchor. Not because it always makes sense, but because you know the one who spoke it sees beyond the now. The cost of disobedience. Every decision comes with a price. But disobedience to God, especially after He's given a clear warning, comes with a cost far greater than inconvenience. It costs you time, it costs you peace, it costs you progress, and sometimes it costs you relationships, opportunities, and even parts of yourself that you didn't realize were vulnerable until they were already wounded. The price of ignoring the don't is never paid up front. It's paid later. And often it's paid with in. The world teaches us to chase results. Fast, loud, big. But what good is a result that you had to compromise your calling to achieve? What good is success if you lose your soul on the way there? Simon Sinek teaches that fulfillment is not found in how much you achieve, but in how closely your actions align with your purpose. And obedience is how we stay in alignment with God's vision for our lives. The cost of disobedience isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it looks ordinary. It shows up in small frustrations that become heavy burdens. It shows up in restlessness that doesn't go away. It shows up in opportunities that dry up, creativity that vanishes, joy that fades. And we start asking questions like, why do I feel stuck? Or why do things keep falling apart? But if we trace it back, the root is often found in a moment where God said, don't go there, and we went anyway. Disobedience has a ripple effect. One wrong turn can affect every road you take after it. And here's what makes it even more challenging. Sometimes you can disobey God and still look successful on the outside. The business may grow, the followers may come, the money may flow, but internally there's a disconnect. You're out of rhythm, out of alignment, out of peace, because you're walking a path that God never told you to walk. When you step outside of His direction, you start depending on your own strength to sustain what He never called you to start. That's exhausting. It's heavy. And it eventually leads to collapse. Not always publicly, but always spiritually. Disobedience forces you to carry burdens you were never meant to carry and to solve problems God never intended for you to face. God doesn't say don't to control us. He says it to cover us. His boundaries are not prisons, they are protections. They exist to shield us from the consequences that our perspective can't predict. But when we override those boundaries, we invite those consequences into our lives. Not as punishment, but as a wake-up call. A reminder that we need God's guidance more than we need our own way. Simon Sinek often says that people lose their way when they lose their why. And the same is true when we walk in disobedience. We stop asking, why am I doing this? And start chasing outcomes without understanding impact. But when God warns us, He's not just preserving the plan, He's preserving the why behind the plan. He's keeping us rooted in purpose so we don't drift into performance. The cost of disobedience can be healed. Grace is real, redemption is possible, but let's be honest. The detour still delays us. The pain still marks us.